turn attention next to a question that might strike you as rhetorical, but actually isn't necessarily. It may prove to have been rhetorical, depending upon what answers we can harvest. But it's not rhetorical, because it may well be that there are at least vaguely compelling or substantive answers to the question that I am about to ask you. The two politicians to whom we are about to refer are among the most powerful politicians, never mind the most powerful women, in these islands. Priti Patel holds one of the great offices of state in the UK government, and Nicola Sturgeon is the First Minister of Scotland. Here is what Catherine Haddon of the Institute of Government had to say in November of last year, as we digested the Prime Minister's response to an inquiry into whether Priti Patel had broken the ministerial code by bullying staff. The Prime Minister finally released Sir Alex Allen's investigation into whether Priti Patel bullied staff in the Home Office. The internal row that delayed the report was clear to see. Allen concluded Patel had breached the ministerial code, even if she wasn't aware she was bullying staff. But the Prime Minister concluded Patel had not breached the code and should not resign. Sir Alex Allen's resignation as the Prime Minister's independent advisor on ministerial code was simultaneously announced. In providing his answer to the Patel inquiry, Johnson has raised serious questions about whether the ministerial code is fit for purpose. In other words, if the Prime Minister is free to completely ignore the conclusions of his own independent advisor on the ministerial code, then what is the point of having one at all? I would also tell you, I'm pretty sure Sir Alex Allen hasn't been replaced, which means they no longer have anybody in the Cabinet Office who is in charge of keeping an eye on this sort of thing. And then we move to Nicola Sturgeon, who you may not even know what exactly it was she was accused of. You sort of have a vague idea that it had something to do with the party's handling, or Miss Sturgeon's handling, of sexual harassment allegations against her predecessor at the top of the SNP, Alex Salmond. And the First Minister referred herself to an independent inquiry into whether she had breached the code after it emerged that she'd held meetings and phone conversations with Mr. Salmond while he was under investigation. James Hamilton is a former Director of Public Prosecutions in Ireland. He was charged with looking at her failure to keep a record of these meetings and conclude whether or not she had misled the Scottish Parliament over when she first knew of the complaints. It doesn't sound like a very big deal when you put it like that, you know. I stress again, I have no skin in the Scottish independence game. If anything, much as I respect and admire the movement, and the arguments for independence seem to me to be becoming bigger and louder with every passing Brexit, I mean every passing day, I don't have skin in this game. As somebody who would quite like to see plurality in UK politics, an independent Scotland would probably consign England to Conservative government for the rest of my life. That's not something I relish. You're perfectly entitled to, but I just want to be clear that I don't have a team in this particular game. Patel-Sturgeon comparisons can, I think, be undertaken almost in a crucible of objectivity. So, that was the accusation. She told MSPs that she'd first learned of the allegations against him on April the 2nd, 2018, but then clarified that she'd actually been told at a meeting 4 days earlier, at a meeting with his chief of staff, that she'd subsequently forgotten. And I'm relying on the Daily Mail for this, because I don't want to rely on a media outlet or an organ that you might claim is somehow sticking up for Sturgeon, if you could find one. Because that, to me, is a little bit remarkable. I mean, you know, did she find out about the allegations on April the 2nd or 4 days previously at the end of March? Does it really matter? It's a little bit more complicated than that. Of course, if she had deliberately lied, or if she'd been found to have deliberately lied, she would have been required to resign. And the reasons why that 4-day hiatus could have been politically potent, I guess, rely upon questions that weren't addressed by the inquiry, which concluded, James Hamilton's inquiry concluded, I am of the opinion that the First Minister did not breach the provisions of the ministerial code in respect of any of these matters. Okay? So there's a committee of MSPs that, as you know, has reported the opposite finding. some of which had already been leaked. They've said that she did mislead MSPs about when she first knew of the allegations. We're back to that 4-day discrepancy. But I think look, the headline in the Daily Mail, Sturgeon is cleared. Report finds she did not breach ministerial code in Salmond Row. Now, Nicola Sturgeon is First Minister of Scotland, which is, I don't know how you'd play it, actually. Don't laugh. But if this was a game of top trumps, and you had Priti Patel, and I had Nicola Sturgeon, and we chose the category power, who has more power? Priti Patel or Nicola Sturgeon? I don't know how you'd calculate it. I don't know what the answer is. I was about to sort of glibly say, obviously being First Minister of Scotland is a more powerful position than being Home Secretary of the whole United Kingdom, but I'm not actually sure it is. I guess you could say that Nicola Sturgeon sits at the top of a pyramid of power, in Scotland, and Priti Patel does not. She sits one seat down from the top of the peak of the pyramid of power. But she broke the ministerial code. She was found to have broken the ministerial code by the Prime Minister's independent advisor on the ministerial code. That was the conclusion. She broke it. The idea that you may not have realised you were bullying people when you were bullying people, let's just say it wouldn't stand up in a court of law, would it? I didn't hit him, Your Honour. He ran into my clenched fist and extended arm. That kind of... I had no idea it was bullying when I bellowed at the top of my voice and belittled people publicly. I had no idea at all. So she's banged to rights. And Nicola Sturgeon is, if you focus exclusively, and I'll only do this caveat a number of times, yes, the Committee of MSPs found differently. Nicola Sturgeon attributes that to party loyalty. You can make of that what you will. But we focus exclusively on the independent advisor on the ministerial code, the independent inquiry into whether or not the ministerial code has been breached. To go back to that Institute of Government commentary on the Priti Patel case, it concludes, the Prime Minister has decided that it is worth saving Priti Patel. It is the ministerial code that has instead paid the price. So, I mean... it may be my particular area of interest because the naked bias of most of the British media is becoming so endemic that the country is now close to being completely gaslit. The idea, for example, that the BBC is left-wing is absolutely hilarious in any objective context. But if you look at how right-wing everything else is, then you can see how the BBC might look left-wing. You go that far to the right or to the left, and then the middle begins to look like the opposite. In fact, it is precisely the impartiality of the BBC that scares the bejesus out of the Conservative government so much. It's the one corner of the British media that they can't buy or get their mates to buy. So I'm particularly interested in that for reasons I've written about and bored you rigid about on many, many times in the past. But this seems to me to be the most coruscating example of it that hopefully we'll ever encounter. Two politicians accused broadly of the same thing, i.e. breaching the ministerial code. One found guilty, given a free pass by, 80%, 90% of the British media? I'm not fully plugged into the Scotland serving media, but looking at the British media that is supposed to serve the whole of the United Kingdom, 80%? Giving Priti Patel a free pass? How could you write, for example, an article for the Daily Mail about Nicola Sturgeon's alleged breach of the ministerial code without mentioning Priti Patel's established breach of the ministerial code? That's not a rhetorical question. I honestly don't know the answer. I don't know how you could sleep straight in bed at night. Oh, this is absolutely outrageous. And, of course, you get the low-level misogyny going on, possibly with both of them, but it's more noticeable with Nicola Sturgeon, whose appearance is routinely maligned in precisely the sort of media outlets that have been calling for her political life. So there's the question. Am I going nuts, or is this the most egregious example of hypocrisy, double standards, and actual duplicity that the British media and conservative political establishment has ever undertaken? Starmer gets a free pass on this. He said if she's found to have breached it, she'd have to go, which, might have been quite good news for Labour, oddly, because any space vacated by the SNP in Scotland, I think, is more likely to be occupied by Labour. This is a slightly naive overview, but it's more likely to be occupied by Labour than the Conservatives. There's no guarantee it'd be occupied by either. But if you had to pick the one most likely to slot into that space against the backdrop of domestic Scottish politics, it would be the Labour Party. So again, there's no skin in the game for the Labour leader here, the Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party. How do you explain it? So even if you conclude that it is the most egregious example we'll ever encounter of the gaslit nature of our nation, the way that the right-wing media now is almost rewriting the rules of normality, here is 100 pages of coverage of Nicola Sturgeon's misdemeanours, alleged misdemeanours, which she has been found now by an independent inquiry not to have committed. And how many times in that hundreds of thousands of pages of coverage and criticism, how many times is it mentioned that the current Home Secretary was found to have broken it once by the independent advisor on the Ministerial Code, and for my money broke it twice because of the offence she committed when Theresa May sacked her? This is real Emperor's New Clothes territory, right? So what is it that these people attacking Nicola Sturgeon while never mentioning Priti Patel, what is it that they see when I see the Emperor's hairy buttocks? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And once again, with a sort of apology, but not with any shame or embarrassment, my grasp of Scottish politics is probably not as good as yours if you are in Scotland or if you follow events up there more closely than I do. I'm not thick and I follow events quite closely, but there could be something that's profoundly relevant to the conversation we're about to have that I'm not fully aware of. OK, 0345 6060 973. Why does Priti Patel's established breach of the Ministerial Code barely get mentioned at all by the kind of characters who've been baying for Nicola Sturgeon's political blood for the last month, and some of whom continue to do so despite the fact that she's now been found by an independent inquiry not to have breached it at all? Is it as egregious, as hypocritical, as clear-cut as it looks? And if so, why the hell aren't more people noticing? Could barely open a British newspaper in the last week without reading gleeful predictions of Nicola Sturgeon's imminent demise. An independent inquiry into whether or not she breached the Ministerial Code has concluded that she didn't. So when you remember that Priti Patel has probably breached it twice, definitely been found by an independent inquiry to have breached it once, and yet remains in post, how do you make sense of that? How do you explain that? It is quite remarkable, not unlike, I suppose, the Barnard Castle visit with Dominic Cummings, prioritising cronies or allies over principles. But the Ministerial Code used to be really important. People seem to be trying to pretend it still is in Scotland, but it isn't in England. Riddle me that. Sam's in Hammersmith. Sam, what's going on?
Hi, James. At a basic level, I think absolutely there are double standards here. Professionalism is extremely important. I don't see why a civil servant should be sworn at or treated badly just because they happen to work for a powerful minister. So absolutely, the issue there was very key. But I think I would say the importance of the Sturgeon case is that Nicola Sturgeon does sit at the top of a pyramid of power, as you say. Priti Patel didn't get very far with having meetings.
But it's not the first Ministerial Code, is it, or the Prime Ministerial Code? So it's the
Absolutely.
Ministerial Code, and there are a few more senior ministers than Priti Patel. So I'm more interested in the question of why you think people who've been baying for Nicola Sturgeon's blood managed to deliver speeches or write newspaper articles without even mentioning Priti Patel. Do they think we're thick, or are they thick? Is it that the Ministerial Code only matters if it's a politician you don't like who's being scrutinised? I generally want a proper look at that simple question. How could anybody write an article about Nicola Sturgeon claiming that if she's found to have broken the Ministerial Code, it's the end of civilization as we know it? Oh, but don't mention Priti Patel, who actually broke it.
I'm not sure if you'd agree, but from what I've seen of the fallout from the inquiry into Alex Salmond, that it raises quite a lot of worrying institutional issues.
You are at some point going to have to answer my question.
Well, to compare the two...
Because you're doing what I'm asking about. You're desperate to talk about Nicola Sturgeon and not about Priti Patel. The entire point of my question is, how can anybody be desperate to talk about Nicola Sturgeon while not talking about Priti Patel?
I think they should have. I think that's
so why do you think they haven't?
Also mention that. As I say at starting, professionalism is really important in.
But why do you think they haven't? I mean, somebody like Andrew Neil in the Mail, I've read pages and pages of him waxing lyrical about Nicola Sturgeon, and barely a mention. I don't think any mention at all. Although that's from memory, haven't got it in front of me. But what motivates people like that? Do you think?
Two alleged breaches of the code. One was
no. It's not two alleged breaches of the code. It's a breach of the code and a non-breach of the code, according to the independent inquiry. So again, you're conflating guilt with innocence.
Sure. She has been found not to have breached the code by the independent inquiry.
Yes.
Yeah.
So back again to the question, Sam. I'm not quite sure what you were expecting to happen when you rang in. Back to the question that we're asking on this live radio phone-in. How the hell can people be talking about Nicola Sturgeon, who didn't breach it, in stronger terms than they talk about Priti Patel, who did?
I'm not sure they're doing that anymore after the conclusion of the independent inquiry.
You didn't hear Douglas Murray or Douglas Ross? I get them confused. You didn't hear the Scottish Conservative leader talking about how there were still grounds for... Are they still having a vote of no confidence today?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
Right.
But for the media commentary, that most of that was before, as you said quite rightly, they were baying for her blood before anticipating.
And then how? Well, then let's pretend that that's true and that they've all stopped baying for her blood now. How could they have been doing that when giving Priti Patel a free pass for committing precisely the offence they seem to be hoping that Nicola Sturgeon would have been found to commit?
So the things that Sturgeon was accused of had to do with her being at the top of a pyramid of power.
Well,
and
it was to do with a 4-day discrepancy and when she was first given some information. It wasn't about abusing colleagues, was it? So we're not going to go down the line of pretending that her alleged offence was more egregious than Priti Patel's, surely. We're both better than that.
Not on the face of it.
No, or indeed underneath the face of it.
About,
yes,
is whether she exerted influence over that inquiry.
Yes, and Priti Patel was found to have abused colleagues. So again, you can find one more offensive than the other, but it's not going to be a unanimous view. So we'll just have one more crack at the central question. Why do you think people who were waxing lyrical about Nicola Sturgeon's alleged offence, one that she's been found by an independent inquiry not to have committed, have been so silent about Priti Patel's actual offence, which she was found by an independent inquiry to have committed?
Well, I think they should have mentioned it. And
why do you think they didn't?
Level, I think there were double standards.
Why do you think they didn't? Why do you think they don't?
It's more current, I suppose, and it has been dragging on. It's also something that people may not have been aware of unless you follow Scottish politics quite closely.
Patel's finding was in sort of October, November of last year. The Sturgeon alleged offence happened in 2018, so it's not more current. Priti Patel wasn't even Home Secretary when Nicola Sturgeon did the thing that you're describing, so it's got nothing to do with being current. What else could it be?
The parliamentary committee believed that Sturgeon misled them.
Yes, those are certainly words, but they don't constitute an answer to the question I've asked you, do they? Why do you think people who are keen to stick one on Nicola Sturgeon have stayed absolutely silent about Priti Patel for the best part of 6 months?
I would imagine because that's already concluded, and they may have a view about that.
Right, but we both know that's not. We both know that's not an answer, don't we? So why do you think they don't care about a breach of the Ministerial Code when Priti Patel does it, but they care passionately about a possible breach of the Ministerial Code when Nicola Sturgeon might have done it, but has been found by an independent inquiry not to have done it?
Perhaps it was inconvenient for them.
What question did you think I was asking when you rang in?
About the relative importance of these two breaches and whether there were double standards applied and how important these breaches were, one from bullying colleagues and the other a potential...
So let's have a crack at it again. Why would people not mention Priti Patel when sharpening their knives for Nicola Sturgeon? I mean, we both know the answer, don't we? It's epic hypocrisy and unbelievable double standards, but you seem reluctant to say that out loud.
I think I said at starting that they were applying double standards there. I completely say that. I just think there are important issues in the allegations against Sturgeon which don't apply to Patel.
Okay. And
the one was individual. And
why do you think Alexander Allen resigned?
Who? Sorry, I don't know who that is.
Sir Alexander Allen, the independent advisor on the Ministerial Code to Boris Johnson, who conducted the inquiry into Priti Patel that you rang in to talk about.
Because the Prime Minister declined to fire the Home Secretary after his inquiry.
So the Ministerial Code doesn't apply in Boris Johnson's government, but people have been shouting from the rooftops that it absolutely has to apply in Nicola Sturgeon's. It's funny, isn't it? I mean, we can agree on that.
Indeed.
Yes. Yeah. Hilarious. Frank's in Glasgow. Frank, what would you like to say?
Oh, thank you so much for taking my call. The whole thing's orchestrated by Westminster. The reality is Westminster is absolutely terrified that they don't have the revenues coming from Scotland. If you look at some of the figures, I know some of your listeners will say, look at the GERS figures. It says that you're not doing very well. When the GERS figures were first introduced...
I'm not doing this. Frank, no offence. I'm not relitigating the independence debate at the moment. I'm looking for a simple answer to the question of why, for example, Scottish Conservatives care passionately about Nicola Sturgeon's alleged breach of the Ministerial Code, but they don't care at all about the Home Secretary's established breach of the Ministerial Code.
The whole thing's designed to slur the leader of the SNP. That's what it's about. Originally, all the slurs were against Salmon, conspire against Salmon, he's bad, and now Nicola hasn't nailed him, so now Nicola's bad, so both of them's bad, and much sticks, and it has done it. We were at 58% pro-independence, now it's dropped, so that's Westminster doing their work. And if you notice any documents that are leaked, they're always against SNP leaders. There is nothing ever leaked in the other direction.
From this committee that you're talking about?
Yeah, from the committee. And again, why is the police not investigating where the leaks come from? Surely they should.
Might do. I mean, I saw one member of the committee, a Conservative member, being asked yesterday whether she had actually done the leaking herself. I guess, and we should probably be more grateful to Sam in Hammersmith a minute ago than I allowed, because what we really find fascinating here is the contortions people will undertake and how far they'll bend backwards to pretend that there is anything other here than pants down hypocrisy. And the massive problem the Tories have is that people like Keir Starmer and me, and you might not like this, Frank, we can say with our full chest, we can say if she was found to have broken the Ministerial Code, and we did say, then she will have to go. Otherwise, the Ministerial Code counts for buttons. And that's where the Tories, unfortunately on this occasion, have really had their pants pulled down.
Yeah, and they're refusing to accept it, and the BBC media up here has been absolutely terrible. They're well-known Labour supporter, Sarah Smith, daughter of Smith, the Labour leader. You should see the attacks that they do. They're absolutely disgusting.
Well, again, I'm going to be just as robust with you as I was with the last fella and steer you back away from relitigating old battles, and I'm interested solely in whether or not there is an answer to the question of why Priti Patel's breach of the Ministerial Code appears to have upset people a lot less than Nicola Sturgeon's non-breach of the Ministerial Code. And that's the question that I want answered. Explain to me why you think them over there, are they pretending? Do they actually not care about ministerial codes at all? They just saw an opportunity to hurt a politician they don't like. And a politician they do like, for whatever reason, who actually broke it, they're just hoping you'll forget. Or they're pointing you over there, or they're distracting you. The weird gaslighting of the population, it can't go on forever. Sometimes the reality has to intervene, and an astonishing case unfolding in America at the moment. Do you remember Sidney Powell? I don't think we covered her much at the time because what she was saying was so obviously ridiculous. Sidney Powell was one of the people, I think probably the most prominent lawyer, claiming that the last American election had somehow been rigged or fixed. She claimed particularly that the vote counting machines made by Dominion Voting Systems had corrupted the election result and that it had been undertaken deliberately. Dominion are suing her. And do you know what her defence is? You need to check these stories just to make sure you're not going mad, don't you? How successfully can you gaslight a population? Answer, how many people honestly still believe that Donald Trump won the election? He's still claiming it publicly. Still claiming it. How did he get away with claiming it? God only knows. But what was he supported by? People like Sidney Powell talking complete gibberish in public. Do you know what her defence in court is? over her claims of election fraud at the 2020 presidential election in America. Her defence in court is, and I kid you not, that no reasonable person could possibly have believed the claims that she was making. I'm no libel lawyer or defamation lawyer, but that seems unlikely to work. You accused me of X, Y, and Z. I did not do X, Y, and Z. Your defence is, yeah, but when I publicly accuse you of X, Y, and Z and appeared on Fox News every 20 minutes on rotation, no one actually would have believed me or taken seriously what I was saying. It's quite incredible. This, given the highly charged and political context of the statements, it's clear that Powell was describing the facts on which she based the lawsuits she filed in support of President Trump. So, well, no one would have believed what I was saying, because what I was saying was so bonkers, but you actually filed lawsuits on his... Yeah, but even when I was standing up in court claiming that there was election fraud, no one would really have taken me seriously on this. I mean, good grief. It is... breathtaking that it continues, and I don't know if you keep track of this. I can't. It drives me too potty. But the claim now that someone said that Joe Biden was giving a speech and a snake accidentally emerged from his pocket or something like that, and that he is secretly in the service of Satan. And you would have once laughed at this, but then you remember how far into the bloodstream QAnon got and how prominent people like this Sidney Powell woman were last year, and you sort of think, well, actually, this lot will believe absolutely anything. 12:37 is the time. Would they believe, however, that a Home Secretary breaching a ministerial code is somehow less important than a First Minister of Scotland not breaching a ministerial code? Or have we got things backwards? Linda is also in Glasgow. Linda, what is going on?
Hello. The Tories, Scottish Tories, that is, rather cleverly exploit the distance between them and Westminster and stand alone as a separate entity to them when it suits them. And then when it doesn't, when they see an opportunity to try and cut the head off the independence, the snake, as they would see it, the person leading the march for independence, they cynically exploit it. I think they think that the distance between them and Westminster and staying, and they've been silent on many issues.
I get that, but I'm in London, and I've been reading the English newspapers, the English editions.
Just recently.
Yes, so you can open up. The Spectator's been going nuts about this. It's been going after Nicola Sturgeon like it was going out of fashion.
I've been watching it with dismay. I've lived in Orpington until fairly recently, just moved up, and I have to say that we're quite sheltered from English politics, sort of Scottish politics. When in England, we only hear about these fights and problems within the SNP. They hype it up because it suits their unionist agenda. They, as I say, basically, my theory is that they exploit the distance between the Scottish Tories and Westminster when it suits them.
No, I get your theory, and it perhaps explains the antics of Scottish Conservatives, but it doesn't explain the antics of English newspapers. And even if the articles are written by Scottish people, they're written for an English audience, and they're going, look over here, Nicola Sturgeon's done something awful. She's breached the ministerial code. To which you respond by saying, well, actually, she hasn't, but it could have gone either way. I don't know. But here's someone who did, Priti Patel, and actually, arguably, Jacob Rees-Mogg's broken it in the last week. It says pretty clearly.
Well, they've all, they prorogued Parliament illegally. There's been Jacob Rees-Mogg pretty. Matt Hancock was found to have broken the law.
It's just surreal.
We know that the media are largely in hock to the current party of government. And it's even extending to the BBC, dare I say it, even extended to the BBC now. They spin a narrative which suits their agenda, and at the moment that is Boris Johnson, his party. And, this is where I sound desperately ungrateful for you ringing in, and I say something slightly sarcastic, like, tell me something I don't know. But of course, how many voices do we need to join as one before the tune becomes irresistible? And the reason I mentioned Jacob Rees-Mogg is that he does a podcast, apparently, which is rather 21st century, and in it he has now said that he was wrong to claim that Arj Singh from the Huffington Post had doctored the recording that was leaked of Dominic Raab
pledging to ride roughshod over the European Convention on Human Rights, one of Winston Churchill's most doughty legacies. But don't actually worry about Winston Churchill's legacies when you could instead be worrying about flags. And he's said on his podcast that he was wrong to do that. The Ministerial Code is pretty clear on this, section 1.3 bracket C brackets, just off the top of my head. It is of paramount importance that ministers give accurate and truthful information to Parliament, correcting any inadvertent error at the earliest opportunity. Ministers who knowingly mislead Parliament will be expected to offer their resignation to the Prime Minister. Reminds me of when Priti Patel didn't knowingly mislead Parliament, but she knowingly misled her Prime Minister. Quite remarkable, really. Priti Patel wrote, "I fell below the standards of transparency and openness that I have promoted and advocated." This after she was ordered back from an official trip in Africa by Theresa May and summoned to Downing Street over unauthorised and undisclosed meetings with representatives of a foreign government, in this case, Israel. And that was just, the mind boggles. And that, of course, is grounds for promotion under Boris Johnson. And then when you breach the Ministerial Code again, he just brushes it under the carpet. The independent advisor on the Ministerial Code resigns, and they don't bother replacing him, so that next time one of them breaks the Ministerial Code, there's nobody there to do an independent inquiry into whether or not the Ministerial Code has been broken. Doff cap, tug forelock, wave union flag. Sue's in Tufton. Sue, what would you like to say?
Well, what I would like to say is, and I speak as somebody who used to, as a senior civil servant in my past, who had to give advice to ministers on a regular basis, is that ministers are generally very, very well protected by senior civil servants, and they're treated like gods. So this idea that Priti Patel did not know that she was bullying is a nonsense, and she was bullying at previous departments, not just the Home Office.
Well, neither of us have seen the full report. We've seen a summary of the report in which Alex Allen said either that she may not have known or she didn't know. So again, we don't need to relitigate that. The fact is that the independent advisor on the Ministerial Code found that the Ministerial Code had been broken.
Absolutely. And for me, the only reason that I can think of that the two female politicians are being treated so differently is because Priti Patel plays to that sort of right-wing, beat them, flog them, lock them up for whatever. She plays to that sort of agenda, and that is the sort of thing that the tabloid press love. So if they start to then attack her in terms of her moral compass, because for me it is about how you treat people and how you behave towards people, particularly members of staff that don't have that sort of power, then that undermines, some of that broader agenda. And for me, that can be the only reason, because everything that she's done in her senior political career would tell you this is not a person that you would want in that kind of position of power. She doesn't have good judgment.
Well, again, you veer into a sort of personal opinions on issues other than the ones we're discussing, and unless, of course, her unsuitability for that job is based upon the fact that she breached the Ministerial Code twice and lied to Theresa May. I don't know enough about what's gone on behind closed doors, except what Alex Allen found.
Yes, that's true. But having been a kind of senior civil servant and seen the way that ministers are treated, the fact that a permanent secretary resigned, they don't do that.
What does the failure to replace him, drawing on your experience, Sue, what does the failure to replace him mean in the sort of bigger picture?
It means that essentially they're deciding that they can rip up the Ministerial Code, so they're doing it in a sort of underhand, subtle way, but that's what they mean, and it's a warning to civil servants not to step out of line. And for me, one of the reasons that our government structures have worked well is because we have had civil servants at a senior level who are there to speak truth to power. And if you speak truth to power and you're shouted down, the permanent secretaries are sacked or have to resign, then who is going to step up and speak truth to power from a lower level?
And that's bad enough. That's egregious enough in and of itself. But then when you add hypocrisy to the sort of moral corruption, it becomes almost unbelievable in scope and scale, because they're saying, oh, no, forget about the Ministerial Code, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, we're all right, we're in charge, we've got an 80-seat majority, woohoo, we got Brexit done, we're the lads. Ministerial codes ain't for the likes of us. But then, when it looks like a weapon with which they might be able to wound Nicola Sturgeon politically, suddenly they all care passionately about ministerial codes. It's so... I mean, the arrogance of how patronising it is what beggars belief. The idea that they think that people will fall for this. How thick must they think that you are if they think you're not going to notice or you're not going to care? Incredible.
Well, I think they've manipulated opinion for so long that it's just become second nature now, and it becomes more and more worrying, because if you do speak out, then you're sort of some sort of, you're woke.
You're an enemy of the state.
You're an enemy of the state. And
what if you speak out, but you've got 8 union flags behind you? Maybe then you get away with it.
Yes, because obviously we're speaking to the character of the country. And for me, the character of the country, the thing that we should be holding up is that we should be able to be truthful. We should be able to put forward our views. We shouldn't belittle the facts. When we get things wrong, we should be strong enough to stand up and say we made a mistake. I think there's plenty of mistakes being made, particularly over the sort of COVID stuff. But we should be able to say we didn't do that 100% right, and we learn from that. But you can't learn from it if you're just smudging over the line. But of course, you can't do that, can you?
Well, I don't think you can. My theory, for what it's worth, is that because the whole government now is built upon the lies of vote leave, they have such a backwards relationship with observable reality, with the truth, that they can never really get back on the right track. But it's look at the opinion polls and look at the majority in the House of Commons. So I hope go on quickly, because I'm late for the break.
Sorry, quickly as well. I did watch some of that evidence at the MSP's committee up in Scotland, and I don't live in Scotland. And what I found appalling was that actually some of the questions, particularly from the Tory MSP woman MP, which she seemed to be suggesting to Nicola Sturgeon that she should have met with Alex Salmond because he was First Minister. And if she had done that, then she would have been absolutely in the wrong. So we seem to be more interested in scoring party political points than holding up what is good, honest behaviour.
Which is perhaps why the perspective from Tufton in Hampshire or from Leicester Square in London is so interesting, because we don't... I mean, I haven't established whether you have particularly strong views on Scottish independence or not. I don't. Certainly for the purposes of this conversation, I can park any feelings or opinions I've got and just say, look, either the ministerial code matters or it doesn't. It can't matter when it's a politician you don't like and matter a lot when it's a politician you do like, or vice versa. And it's so obvious in this case, the double standard, that one wonders quite how anybody can fail to see it. And Sue has provided the answer, of course. You can fail to see it if Priti Patel's brand of politics appeals to you. You'll forgive her anything. And there we are. We're back to Fifth Avenue again. Well, I never. I mean, it's all very well, isn't it, presuming. But reality can often undo your presumptions. You would imagine that claiming I can't really be taken seriously, if you tried to sue me for saying something about you on the radio, and my defence was, no, you can't do that, because no one takes me seriously. Everyone knows I'm full of it. I mean, apart from Keith, who you could probably call as a witness, actually, then it would be a ridiculous defence. But I'm just laughing at the case of Sidney Powell, the lawyer who issued lawsuits claiming that the last American election had been rigged or there'd been fraudulent action, and she's now being sued by the people that run the voting machines. And her defence is, oh, don't be ridiculous, nobody sensible could have taken me seriously. What I was saying was so obviously absurd. I don't think that defence is going to work because of the lawsuits. But it might, because lots of you have brought to my attention the fact that the Fox News presenter Tucker Carlson used almost an almost identical defence in a $10 million libel lawsuit. Actually, I must get the numbers right. That's a different lawsuit. Well, anyway, in a lawsuit in which he claimed that, or his lawyers claimed that no one really would take what he said seriously. It's quite incredible, and it worked. That's the clincher. The judge found it was a reasonable defence against accusations of slander to claim that the show, no one watching the show could possibly believe that he was stating actual facts about the topics he discusses, and is instead engaging in exaggeration and non-literal commentary. This is astonishing. I think personally that these judges should do a few of our shifts at the other end of the sewer of American and British media, and then they'd find out whether... I think there's a slightly patronising belief that people watch Fox News or listen to the British equivalents, read more at the moment, the British equivalents, than watch or listen, and think that people are watching it with a sort of amused disdain. So nobody takes Fox News seriously. It's probably mostly watched by sniggering liberals. But you know and I know they really, really, really do. But this judge apparently didn't get it, because the judgment was, Fox persuasively argues that given Mr. Carlson's reputation, any reasonable viewer arrives with an appropriate amount of scepticism about the statement he makes. That's incredible. So the defence is, don't worry, everyone tuning into my show knows I'm full of it. These are mad times, seriously, and some days you forget just how mad and how quickly they've become so mad. Back to the question of how Priti Patel can breach the Ministerial Code and get a pat on the back from most of the British media, while Nicola Sturgeon, who hasn't breached it, has still got people baying for her political blood. Charlie is in Culross. Charlie, what would you say? How would you answer this question? What is going on? Hello.
Yeah, so what I would say to yourself and most people down south is you've got to look at the bigger picture when it comes to Scotland. Up here, we're about to have an election which is basically a de facto independence election. The SNP are flying high in the polls.
A bit of a nudge this weekend. I'm not quite sure whether Purdah has started yet. I probably should be clear on this, but don't say any more about the arithmetic of looming elections. Just talk to me in very broad brushstrokes.
Yeah, so basically what you've got here is you've got Nicola Sturgeon, who's a very popular leader in Scotland. And she's actually the most popular leader in England as well, if you look at some of these recent polls. I'll
take your word for that. I haven't checked.
That's actually true. But anyway, when you look at approval ratings, she's the highest of all the leaders in the UK. And what you've got here is you've got these unionist MPs up here who are just trying anything to gain a 2% swing in this election that's due to come. And that then would possibly halt another independence referendum. What Nicola Sturgeon...
But I know this bit. I forgive me. It's not... I mean, it has turned into a rhetorical question, hasn't it? But yeah. I'm going to ask it one more time. How do you think, and I suppose possibly we should have tried to get some of them onto the programme, how could you write, for example, 1,000 words about how awful Nicola Sturgeon is because she might have broken the Ministerial Code, brackets we now know that an independent inquiry has concluded she didn't, while not mentioning Priti Patel? I'm interested in whether there's any answer to that question that doesn't begin with H and end with hypocrisy.
Well, I don't think there is in that case.
No.
As I say to your call handler, Priti Patel went and had undisclosed meetings with Israeli ministers while on holiday regarding British foreign aid going to a military hospital in the occupied Golan Heights.
Well, again, you're better informed than I am. Almost all my callers. I know she had unauthorised meetings with Israeli officials. I know that she apologised to Theresa May for it. I know that they were undisclosed, and I know that Benjamin Netanyahu was one of the politicians. But you've taken me up to the wire, and you know, if it begins with H and ends with hypocrisy, then it's probably hypocrisy. I don't know. Maybe there is a different answer to this. If you get the chance to ask any of the people who write this bilge, do send them my regards and ask them how they sleep straight at night, because I'm damned if I know. Seriously. Here's someone who broke the Ministerial Code. Oh, don't worry. It's just a little bit of light bullying. Here's someone who didn't. Oh, my God, she misremembered by 4 days. I think she's lying. We must stone her. How? No one. Seriously. And if you think you can answer that question without using the word hypocrisy, I'm afraid it's possibly too late for even me to rescue you from the consequences of being so completely and comprehensively gaslit. And of course, as that famous caller last year told us, I like being lied to, James, because it upsets people like you and Sadiq Khan.